My name is Emily Carter, and at my sister's glamorous wedding, I thought wearing my late mother's navy dress would honor her memory. Instead, they mocked me, laughed at me, and whispered, "It looked like something dragged out of war." But before the night ended, the bride herself broke down, confessed. The dress carried a secret my mother had hidden her whole life, and a stranger walked in claiming to be my real father, silencing the entire hall. The chandeliers glittered above the ballroom, scattering light across polished marble, as if the hotel itself wanted to remind us of its grandeur. The air smelled of roses and champagne, and the quartet's music curled around the guests like velvet. I stepped inside, heels tapping against the floor, holding my clutch so tightly my knuckles hurt. The navy dress swayed against my legs, simple and worn, but precious. It was my mother's, the last thing she left me, and I had promised myself it would be enough. For the first seconds, I believed it was. The warmth of the lights, the buzz of voices, the hum of celebration, all of it felt almost safe. Then a sharp laugh cut through. A girl from Lily's college leaned close to her friend, her words slicing the air. "That looks like something from another era." Her friend giggled behind her hand, but she wanted me to hear. The sound spread. It moved down the row of tables near the stage where Alex's relatives sat in suits and sequined gowns. One groomsman tilted his glass and smirked. "Maybe she's trying the vintage look." Their laughter rose and I felt heat climb up my neck. I kept walking, pretending not to notice, but each step felt heavier. Cousins whispered when I passed. Their eyes slid over the fabric and their lips twitched, as if they had swallowed something sour. I gripped the strap of my clutch until it left marks in my palm. Then a hand caught my arm. "Margaret!" Her pearls glinted under the chandelier, her perfume sharp, her smile stretched too thin. She leaned close, her voice sweet enough for the nearby table to hear. "That dress reminds me of the old war years. Funny you'd wear it here." My breath caught. She knew something. The way she lingered on war wasn't casual. I forced my lips into a polite curve. "It belonged to my mother." Margaret's eyes glimmered. "Oh, I know. She wore it once for an occasion we all remember. Not exactly a memory for a wedding." The words were heavy, almost practiced, and they slid under my skin like cold water. I wanted to ask what she meant, but her smirk told me she enjoyed my silence too much. Around us, laughter bubbled again, louder, like the room itself had turned against me. I found my table at last, tucked near the edge of the ballroom, too close to the service door. I sat down, my spine stiff even as my knees trembled. My fork shook when I picked it up, and I set it down quickly before anyone noticed. Every glance I caught was quick, then gone, as if people didn't want to be caught staring at me, but couldn't resist. The music shifted, bright and triumphant, and for a moment, I let my eyes rest on the champagne in front of me. The bubbles rose steady, unlike my breath. A memory pressed in, sudden and uninvited. My mother sitting alone late one night, holding this dress, whispering words I never understood. "Someday the truth will come out," she had said. At the time, I thought it was grief speaking. Now, with Margaret's whisper in my ear, I wasn't sure. Applause erupted. Lily and Alex entered the ballroom, her hand in his, her gown shimmering like glass under the lights. Every head turned toward her, the perfect bride. She smiled wide, but when her eyes brushed mine, something flickered. It wasn't happiness, it was unease. I lifted my glass when she did, forcing the gesture, though my hand trembled. The crystal rang as it touched another, a sound too delicate to hold the weight pressing down on me. The laughter didn't fade. It floated above the music, stubborn, clinging. I pressed my palm flat on the table, grounding myself, telling myself to breathe. And then it happened. Lily's gaze lingered on me too long. She looked away quickly, her smile faltering for the briefest second. The movement was so slight most people would have missed it, but I saw it. My chest tightened. Margaret's smirk, my mother's words, Lily's nervous eyes. Pieces that didn't fit yet, pressed against each other. I stayed still, the room buzzing around me, and for the first time that night, I knew the dress carried something more than memory, something I was not meant to discover here. The music swelled again, the bride raised her glass higher, and I did the same. My lips touched the rim, but the champagne never passed my tongue. My eyes stayed on Lily on the way she avoided looking back at me, and I realized the night was only just beginning. Her eyes slipped past me too quickly, and in that tiny flicker something sharp opened inside my chest. The music and laughter blurred, and before I knew it, my mind was sliding backward, away from the glitter of Boston, into the hushed nights of Ohio, where everything had begun. I was 10 the first time I realized Lily was the favored one. She was the pretty child with soft curls and big eyes that made people smile without her even trying. I was restless, always climbing fences, scratching my knees, answering back, when adults wanted silence. My mother would hush me with that weary look, then turn to Lily with a gentleness that never reached me. At Christmas, I remember unwrapping a pair of wool socks while Lily twirled in a velvet dress with a silver bow. Mom kissed her cheek and told me to be happy for her sister. Birthdays were no different. If Lily wanted the bigger cake slice, I was told to give it up. If she wanted the seat by the window, I was told to move. Mom always said you are stronger. Emily let her have this one. But those little forfeits piled up like stones, and after a while, I stopped asking for anything at all. The clearest memory came one winter night when I woke to the sound of muffled sobs. I crept down the hall to my mother's room. The door cracked just enough to see her sitting on the edge of her bed with the navy dress pooled in her lap. The lamp cast a pale glow on her face, streaked with tears. She clutched the fabric to her chest and whispered words that froze me in place. Someday the truth will come out, but it will ruin everything. She pressed her face into the folds, as if the dress itself could swallow the secret. I remember retreating to my room, heart pounding, not daring to breathe. That image clung to me for years. Tonight, wearing the same dress, I felt it pressing down like a weight I had carried without knowing. The laughter in the ballroom faded to a dull hum, and when I blinked, I was back in Boston staring at my sister, radiant in white. Lily's face was flushed, her smile stretched too tightly, and every few seconds her gaze flicked to me, then away again, as if the sight of me unsettled her. I shifted in my chair, my fingers worrying the edge of the napkin. Margaret's perfume reached me before her voice did. She leaned down, pearls brushing my shoulder, and spoke softly enough that only I could hear. "Your mother wore that dress for a night best forgotten." The words slipped into me like a knife. I turned my head, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "What do you mean by that?" Her lips curved. "Oh, child, some memories are better left buried." Then she patted my arm, her rings cold against my skin, and walked away, as though she had delivered nothing more than a compliment. My stomach tightened. Around me, the guests were laughing, glasses, clinking, plates being cleared, yet every sound felt distant. I could only see Lily across the room, fingers twisting in her bouquet shoulders, tense despite the smile she tried to hold. She looked like she wanted to say something, or maybe like she feared I already knew. I tried to steady my breath, but the memory of my mother's voice and Margaret's whisper tangled together until I could not separate them. The fabric against my skin felt less like comfort and more like evidence, a piece of history I had been too young to understand. A waiter passed and I reached for my glass, more for something to do than thirst. The champagne fizzed against my tongue, bitter where it should have been sweet. I glanced at the head table again, watching Lily glance back before quickly turning away, her knuckles white against the stem of her glass. The noise in the ballroom swelled as someone tapped a spoon against a glass for a toast. I set my drink down, my hand unsteady, the napkin slipping to the floor. No one noticed, but my pulse hammered as if I had dropped something far louder. I bent to pick it up, the navy skirt pooling around me, and for a second I thought I could hear my mother's whisper again, hidden in the folds. When I straightened, Margaret was across the room, smiling too brightly, at nothing in particular. Lily was staring at me again. Her lips pressed tight, her face pale under the chandelier's light. The music lifted, but all I could hear was the silence between us, stretched taut and waiting to snap. I stayed very still, the napkin clenched in my hand, knowing the night had only started to peel back its layers, and that the next one would cut deeper. The chatter swelled again, laughter, mixing with the clink of glasses, and my grip on the napkin left tiny creases along the fabric. Every whisper seemed to circle back to me to the dress draped across my shoulders, as if the entire ballroom had chosen a single target. I lowered my gaze to the table, willing the moment to pass, when a voice beside me rose above the noise. "That dress carries more worth than you all realize." The words were clear, strong, almost too loud. I turned and found a man I had not noticed before seated only a few chairs away. His hair was silver at the temples, his suit simple compared to the glittering tuxedos around us. He looked at me with steady eyes, then shifted his gaze toward the room, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The laughter faltered for a second, curiosity prickling through the crowd. Who was he? I heard someone murmur his name, Robert, though I did not know him. He leaned slightly toward me and added softer, "This time I knew your mother once." My pulse jumped. The weight of his words hung there, tempting questions I was too afraid to ask. Before I could respond, the groom raised his glass high, his voice smooth and full of practiced charm. "To my beautiful bride and to family," Alex said, smiling wide. "And to my new sister-in-law, who clearly has her own taste in fashion. Not quite the vibe of this place, unless she wanted to stand out." The tables erupted. Laughter rolled through the hall, spilling over itself louder than before. My chest tightened, my throat dry. I felt every eye stab into me, as if I had chosen humiliation as my evening's role. Margaret's laugh cut sharper than the rest. She leaned in, her voice dripping with delight. "You really don't know your mother, do you?" The words were acid. My chair scraped as I pushed it back, the sound slicing across the ballroom. I stood heart racing, wanting nothing more than to escape the eyes, the whispers, the suffocating brightness. Gasps rose, then a ripple of mocking applause, guests clapping as though my humiliation was part of the entertainment. I stepped away from the table, the navy skirt brushing against my knees, but a hand caught mine. Firm, steady. "Robert." His eyes locked on mine and his voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "Do not leave. The truth is about to break open." The noise blurred behind me. I froze, torn between the doorway that promised relief and the stranger who claimed to hold answers. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my palms. He kept his hand on mine, not forceful but grounding like an anchor against the rising tide. I sat back down slowly, though every muscle screamed at me to run. Robert leaned closer, his voice calm, yet charged with something I could not name. "I knew your mother in Ohio. She trusted me. The dress is not what they think." I wanted to ask him everything, to demand what he meant. But the crowd's laughter still hummed around us, and Margaret's gaze pierced from across the room like a hawk circling prey. She was smiling, enjoying my discomfort, but her eyes flickered toward Robert with a glint I did not miss. She knew him, or she knew enough to feel threatened. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs, trying to steady the shaking. Lily caught my eye from the head table. For a fleeting second, her expression cracked worry, spilling through the perfect mask. She looked from me to Robert, then quickly away, her knuckles white against her bouquet. My mind churned. My mother's whispers, Margaret's taunts, Robert's sudden arrival. They tangled together into a knot too tight to undo. The air around me thickened, each breath harder than the last. The quartet struck up another tune, the violins cutting sharp, but beneath the music, the whispers persisted, threads of gossip winding tighter. I felt the eyes again, the judgment, but also something new. A shift, a current waiting to break. Robert's hand finally released mine, though his words lingered. "Soon." I sat motionless, the navy fabric heavy on my shoulders, the room spinning with sound and light. I did not know whether to fear him or cling to him, but one truth pressed hard against me. Whatever secret had lived in this dress was no longer mine to carry quietly. And as Margaret raised her glass across the room, her smile cold and triumphant, I knew she was waiting for it to erupt just as much as I was. The applause that followed Margaret's raised glass felt like daggers, and my breath caught in my throat. I lowered my gaze, bracing myself for another round of ridicule, when a different voice cut through the noise. "Leave her alone. No one has the right to humiliate someone for what they wear." The room stilled, shocked, that anyone would step in. I turned and saw Hannah, a girl I had known in high school, standing tall at her table near the back. Her voice trembled, but held firm, carrying across the chandeliers and polished marble. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I had not seen in years, simple kindness. The effect was immediate. Some guests clapped in agreement, muttering that Margaret had gone too far. Others scoffed, their laughter tightening, determined to keep the spectacle alive. The ballroom split like glass under pressure. Margaret seized the moment, her voice sharp and ringing. "Oh, please, do not act as if this family has not always been dramatic." Her gaze swept across the tables, lingering on me. Emily's mother, bless her soul, was a dreamer, always reaching where she should not. The implication dropped like a stone in water, sending ripples through the crowd. Whispers spread, shoulders leaned together, eyes darted to me. I felt the heat rush to my face, my chest aching, as if she had dragged my mother into the fire with me. Alex stood abruptly, his glass still in his hand. His smile was too wide, too forced. "All right, that is enough. It was just a joke. Emily, do not take it so seriously." The laughter swelled again, emboldened by his words. My stomach clenched. My own brother-in-law on his wedding night had chosen to join the chorus instead of shielding me. I glanced at Lily, my sister, the bride glowing in her white gown. She bowed her head, her eyes locked on the tablecloth, silent. That silence cut deeper than Margaret's barbs or Alex's careless grin. I gripped the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. The fabric of the dress felt heavier with every breath. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth back into their smug faces, but the words caught behind my teeth. Then Robert leaned closer. His voice was calm but full of weight. "I knew your mother well. That dress did not come from her closet alone. It was a gift from a man she loved deeply, a man she could never name." The world tilted. I turned to him sharply, my pulse roaring in my ears. "What are you saying?" His eyes stayed steady on mine. "That dress is not what they think. It never was." The chandelier lights blurred, the laughter dulled, and all I could feel was the echo of my mother's late-night sobs and the sight of her clutching this very fabric. My breath came shallow, the puzzle pieces scattering and snapping into place all at once. Around us, the argument flared again. Some defended me, some jeered, the noise rising until the ballroom no longer felt like a wedding but a battlefield. Margaret's laugh pierced it all, her glass raised high, as if she was conducting the chaos. I sat frozen. Robert's words circling like a storm in my head. The dress, the whispers, my mother's tears, Lily's nervous eyes. They were all pointing to a truth that felt too big, too dangerous to face under the chandelier light. I lifted my eyes once more toward Lily. Her hands trembled as she held her bouquet, her face pale, her lips pressed tight as if sealing something inside. She looked at me, then away, then back again, as if she knew exactly what Robert had meant, but could not bring herself to speak it aloud. My chest tightened, the napkin still clutched in my lap. The laughter and shouts blended into a single roar, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. And in that noise I knew the night was about to rip open wider, and that whatever truth was buried in my mother's past was about to crawl into the light whether I wanted it or not. The sound broke through the chaos like glass shattering. A delicate tap of silver against crystal, then another. The room hushed, voices stumbling into silence, heads turning toward the bride at the center of it all. Lily stood, her champagne flute trembling so hard I feared it would slip from her hand. Her voice wavered, thin, but clear enough to slice through the quiet. "Please, everyone stop." The ballroom froze. The quartet faltered into silence, the servers halted mid-step, and all eyes fastened on her. My sister's cheeks were pale, her eyes glossy under the chandelier light. She looked straight at me, not at the guests, not at Alex, only me. "Emily, you do not know the truth. That dress you are wearing tonight is not just a keepsake. It is part of a story our mother never had the courage to tell." The air shifted. Gasps cracked across the room, followed by the hum of voices rising like a storm tide. Guests leaned into each other, whispering eyes darting between us, as if they had stumbled into a play they were never meant to see. Margaret's laugh rang out sharp and triumphant. At last, I told you the past never stays buried. My heart slammed against my ribs. My throat was dry words trapped inside me. I wanted to ask Lily what she meant to demand she explain, but my tongue was heavy. Robert rose slowly, steady against the chaos. His chair scraped back, commanding attention, though he spoke softly. I was there. I knew her. Your mother. The crowd surged louder, his words fanning the fire. Heads turned, mouths moved, and still I sat frozen, the dress heavy as stone against my skin. Lily wiped at her cheek, her voice breaking. Mom carried this secret her whole life. She wanted to protect us, to protect you, but she could not bear the truth. Her words fractured into silence, her lips trembling. She pressed a hand to her chest, her breath uneven, then glanced toward the grand doors at the far end of the ballroom. The sound of hinges groaned through the hall. Every head swiveled. The doors opened wide and a man stepped in. Not young, not old, but worn with years that lined his face. His hair dark at the crown, but streaked silver at the edges, his suit plain, not belonging to the glittering crowd. He walked forward unhurried, though every step seemed to pull the air tighter. When he reached the edge of the light, his eyes found mine. "I am David," he said, voice steady, though I heard something raw beneath it. "I am your father." The silence broke like thunder. Gasps erupted, a cry somewhere near the back, and Margaret clapped once in bitter delight. The guests' voices surged into a storm, questions colliding, disbelief spilling across the tables. I sat frozen, my blood rushing too fast to hold. My father. Not the man I had grown up calling Dad. Not the man who raised me, distant though he was. This stranger standing under the chandelier claimed to be mine. Robert's hand steadied the table, his face pale but resolute. Lily's shoulders shook as tears slid down her cheeks. She mouthed something I could not catch, then dropped her gaze, unable to hold mine. My heart pounded louder than the noise, drowning out the questions rising around us. I wanted to scream it was a lie, to push the man back through those doors, but my body would not move. My eyes clung to his, searching for proof, for denial, for something that would undo what he had just said. The chandeliers above flickered as if straining against the weight of the silence that followed. I could not breathe. Not yet. Not until someone explained how the life I thought I knew had just shattered with a single sentence. David stepped closer, the noise of the room shrinking as though every sound bent around him. In his hand was an envelope worn at the edges, yellowed like it had been hidden away for decades. He held it out but did not let go, his eyes fixed on me. "Your mother wrote this. She wanted you to have it when the time came." Lily's voice cracked before I could move. "Emily, we are not the same. We never were." Her words trembled heavy with guilt. "We do not share a father. Mom loved David before she married the man we called Dad. That dress. It was his gift to her from a love she could never admit." The air shifted thick with whispers that spread like wildfire. My stomach twisted, the dress against my skin, suddenly unbearable. I stared at Lily, my own sister, my mirror in childhood, and saw the truth spilling from her eyes. Memories returned like shards of broken glass. The birthdays where she was given the bigger slice. The way our mother's voice softened only for her, the nights I was told to be strong so Lily could have more. I had thought it was favoritism, cruelty even. But no, it was guilt. A mother overcompensating for the daughter she believed she had wronged, leaving me to carry silence. David stepped closer, lowering his voice, though the room still buzzed. "I never left by choice. Your mother's family pushed me out. They wanted me gone, erased because of who I was and what we shared." His eyes burned as he spoke. "They forced me out of Ohio after the scandal. It was the only way to keep her safe. And she kept you from me, to protect you from the same shame." The chandeliers flickered as if echoing the weight of his words. Scandal. The word rooted itself in the air, drawing gasps from corners of the room. I wanted to ask what kind, what sin was so damning, but my voice stayed trapped, my mind spinning too fast. Margaret's laughter rang out sharp and merciless. I always knew it would crawl back to the surface. She looked around, eyes flashing, enjoying every face twisted in shock. I knew from the beginning. She thought she was clever hiding it. Your mother was never the saint you all believed. Her voice sliced me open. Rage and humiliation churned together. She had known all this time, had held it over us like a weapon, waiting for the perfect night to strike. My body shook, my heart hammering so violently I thought I might collapse. I looked back at Lily. She was crying openly now, her gown clutched in her hands, as if it could steady her. I wanted to scream at her for keeping the truth from me, to demand why she had stayed silent until tonight. But her face told me what I feared most. She had been forced into silence too. The letter in David's hand trembled slightly as he finally placed it on the table before me. I could not bring myself to open it, not yet. The weight of it was already crushing enough. Every piece of my life rearranged itself in that moment. The father I thought I knew was no father at all. The mother I adored had built her love for me out of lies and omissions. My sister had carried the secret on her wedding day until it spilled under chandeliers and champagne, and Margaret had waited hungry to see me destroyed. The voices around us rose, some gasping in pity, others murmuring scandal with relish. I barely heard them. My vision tunneled until all I could see was the navy fabric across my lap, the very symbol of betrayal. The truth had cracked open in the middle of a ballroom, and though my chest felt shattered, I knew this was only the beginning of what still lay hidden. The ballroom erupted as if a dam had burst. Relatives pressed hands to their mouths, eyes wide with disbelief, their whispers colliding into a roar. Some guests rose from their chairs. Others clutched at one another, desperate to make sense of what they had just heard. The air thickened with shock and shame until every breath felt like it might shatter me. Alex stumbled to his feet, his face flushed, his jaw set tight. He looked at Lily with something between anger and betrayal. "You knew this, and you said nothing." His voice cracked louder than he intended, and the guests closest to them turned to watch, as though they had been waiting for the next fracture. Lily's hands shook around her bouquet, her tears smudging the careful makeup painted for this day. "I was going to tell you, but I could not. Not like this." Margaret seized the silence like a blade. "Of course she could not," she said, her tone dripping with triumph. I encouraged her to finally speak the truth. Someone had to after all these years. It was time for this family to face what your precious mother tried to bury. Her words stung worse than the laughter had. She was not here for truth. She was here to wound, to take pleasure in the ruin. I felt it in her smile, cold and sharp, and rage swelled in me. Robert raised both hands as though to calm a storm. "Enough, Margaret. This is not about your bitterness." He turned toward the guests, his voice steady. I knew Emily's mother well, and David's love for her was real. She was trapped by circumstance, by fear of what others would do. He looked toward David as though to steady him. She wanted to protect her daughter, not deceive her. But his words only made my chest burn hotter. "Protect me!" I almost laughed. Everyone in this room seems to know pieces of the story, except me. My own life reduced to a secret traded in whispers. I could barely keep my voice steady. "You all knew. And you left me in the dark." The silence that followed was heavy. Alex broke it with a bitter laugh, shaking his head at Lily. "Did you think our marriage could survive this? That I would stand here while you kept secrets about your family, about me?" The mention of him brought another ripple of confusion, and I caught it in David's face. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing not at me, but at Alex. I turned toward him, my body trembling. "You say you are my father, but where were you? Why did you abandon her? Abandon me?" David's voice dropped raw and low. "I did not abandon either of you. I was forced out. I was threatened." The room stilled again, the word hanging sharp. "By who?" I demanded, though my voice shook with fear of the answer. David's eyes flicked toward Alex's family, seated near the front, their faces pale, lips pressed thin. "It was them. The same people who stand beside your new brother-in-law tonight. Years ago, they made sure I left Ohio. They buried me to keep their own name untarnished." Gasps spread like fire. I saw Alex's mother stiffen her hand frozen on her glass. Alex himself looked torn, his anger at Lily colliding with disbelief at David's accusation. My knees weakened, the floor tilting under me. Every tie, every bond I thought I could trust was fraying in real time. Some guests rose, gathering coats, eager to escape the wreckage. The music had long stopped, the chandeliers above, casting light that felt too harsh, exposing every fracture of our family. I looked at Lily. Her face was crumpled, her lips moving in apology, but I could not bear to hear it. My eyes locked on David, searching for truth in his grief-worn face. The ballroom emptied slowly, chairs scraping, whispers trailing into the corridor. What had been a celebration was now rubble, and we were left standing in it. I stayed rooted to the floor, the navy dress heavy on my skin, the letter still lying unopened on the table. For all that had been revealed, I knew more shadows still lingered, waiting to be dragged into the light. The ballroom emptied slowly, footsteps echoing against the marble, until only silence clung to the air. I finally moved, gathering the letter from the table, as if it weighed more than stone. My legs carried me down a quiet hallway until I reached a small lounge, its light softer, casting everything in muted gold. Lily was already there, seated on the edge of a couch, her shoulders shaking as she wept. David stood near the window, his figure outlined by the faint glow of the city outside. I sat without a word. The sound of Lily's sobs filled the room until she looked at me, her eyes red, her voice breaking. "I am sorry. I ruined everything. This was supposed to be my day, but it could not stay hidden anymore. You deserve the truth even if it cost me everything." Her words pulled at me. Anger still burned hot, but so did a kind of sorrow that made my chest ache. I wanted to scream at her for waiting so long, for letting me stumble blindly, but I could also see the little girl she once was, trembling in front of me, carrying a weight she should never have carried. David stepped forward, holding out the letter. "Your mother wrote this when she knew time was short. She wanted you to hear her words one day, not through whispers, not through strangers." My fingers shook as I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was familiar, looping, fragile. She wrote that she had loved me fiercely, but fear had shaped her choices. She confessed the dress had been David's gift, a reminder of a love she was never allowed to claim. She admitted she had given Lily more because guilt had eaten her alive. And in the final lines, she left me a small inheritance, not wealth, but a gesture, something only mine, tucked away, for the day I would need to build a life separate from the lies. The tears I had been holding back slid down my cheeks. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling the words sink into me like a balm and a wound all at once. The door creaked, and Margaret slipped inside. Her smile polished her voice, falsely sweet. "Emily, I went too far tonight. I only wanted you to understand." Her presence made my blood rise. I stood, the letter clutched tight in my hand. "Enough. You have had your fun. You are not welcome here." Her face twisted for a moment before she smoothed it again. She muttered something under her breath and left the click of her heels fading quickly down the hall. Silence returned. I looked at Lily, her face blotched with tears, and for the first time I reached for her hand. She gripped it like she had been drowning. "Be happy," I whispered. "For both of us." Her tears spilled faster, but she nodded, her lips trembling with something that looked like relief. David moved closer, his eyes soft, his voice low. "Come with me, Emily, back to Ohio. There are things you need to see, stories that need to be told in the place where it all began." I looked down at the navy dress, the one that had carried me through humiliation and revelation, and I felt its weight shift. It was no longer just a reminder of what I had lost. It had become the doorway to what I might finally claim. I rose to my feet, slipping the letter into my clutch. The night outside was cold, snowflakes tumbling gently through the Boston air. David held the door open, and for the first time in hours, I let my lungs fill deep with clean air. We stepped out together, leaving behind the ruin of a wedding and walking into something uncertain, but undeniably ours. Sometimes the truth breaks you, but sometimes it sets you free. What do you think Emily should do next? Would you have stayed with the family or followed David to uncover the past? Share your thoughts and stay close because this story is far from finished.